If you know how to read, the world of books is open to you after all. And if you like to read, you'll read. If you don't, you'll forget whatever anybody makes you read, anyways. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review on AMI Audio. I'm your host, Jacob Shymanski. AMI's Ramya Amuthan is with me. Rams, what is that quote
Yeah.
you just made me read? It's so sickly sweet and Disney. What is that?
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks for your first interpretations of it. It is from this book called Little Big. It's by John Crowley. And I thought it was fitting. I was going through quotes from this book, and some of them were so romantic and so beautiful. I really wanted to put them in, but this is fitting because we're talking about being a resourceful audiobook listener again. Part two of the
Mm.
conversation we started last time, online resources, recommendations, yada, yada, yada. And I thought, this is perfect. If you love to read, you will read. And if you don't really care about what you're reading or whether or not you should read anyway, which sadly, there's so many people who just don't read anymore or don't grow up reading. And in that case, recommendations don't mean squat.
And in
Pretty
the last
literal.
little, yeah, in the last little bit of the quote, I kind of interpreted that as meaning if people force you to read, then you're not going to like it. Which
Yeah.
brings me back to the conversation I had with Nisreen and Ryan Huey on this show about how English class nowadays in high school sucks because you have to read books. Keyword here, have to. It's like homework because it's assigned to
Yeah.
you. It doesn't feel like you want to do it, even if it might otherwise be a really good book. And this is why I think I wanted to continue this conversation because when you look for recommendations for an audiobook that you'll enjoy, you're already getting off to such a better start than something that was just assigned to you. Do you remember being in
But
English
hasn't
class and
English class
having to read
always been
books?
like that?
That's
Yes, I
that's no
remember the
reason. That's no reason to just accept its suckiness just because
I
it's been like
guess
that
not.
forever.
That's true, but I mean, like, how else are you gonna get kids to read? My brother, who's 23 now, I think can count on one hand the number of novels that he's picked up, or chapter books might be what he kept calling it at some point, and
A
then just
chapter
stopped reading.
book.
So sad. Yeah, it's like grade 8. But it's because, if it's not assigned reading, then how are you supposed to get into it? Not everybody grows up, with books on bookshelves and parents who read and like the culture of reading kind of being ingrained into you, right? Some of us got to get forced. I did.
Well, one thing you could do is make kids choose from a huge list of books.
Yeah,
Right?
that's fair.
Instead of just
Yeah, I
giving them
like
a
that.
single book that you can all discuss, right? You make them choose and then make like a presentation about it, right? Something that they
Mm,
actually enjoy, sort of read and tell, if you will. I actually
yeah.
did that. I remember in 7th grade, and I thought it was awesome. I read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and I promised my teacher I didn't watch the movie.
Now, how are you supposed to believe anybody who says that? But yeah, it's true. I remember in high school we had to read The Great Gatsby, then watch the movie, and all of it I completely faked. And to this day, I don't think I've actually read The Great Gatsby properly. I just know it because I know it. And sadly, I think like that's getting more and more prevalent as well. But I agree with you. I think that like these kind of book club scenarios are more what you're leaning into, right? Like you give people the opportunity to remember like Maple Book Club and White Pine and all that, the different reading
Yes.
levels growing up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Those
I do.
programs were very encouraging for reading.
Another online resource that's really useful for people to use is online book clubs. And what's really cool about them is you don't need to be at the right place at the right time to fully enjoy them. Basically,
Hmm.
it's you'll find forums, and there's some subreddits on Reddit for this as well. Just r/book club where they choose a book, and then basically chapter by chapter, each chapter has its own page where people discuss it. And so what you can do is like read the book, and then once you finish a chapter, you go to the relevant chapter in the book and see how people are taking
Huh.
it. And in the comments and the messages on that page, it's spoiler free up to the point where you're at in the book, effectively being like a book club, but you're not like temporally locked, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. So Reddit is
Hmm.
huge for lots of different kinds of niche conversations, and you can like start broad and then end up in just an absolute rabbit hole. This is an example of that, I think. Have you interacted with people on Reddit? Does it feel real time? 'Cause that's always the question for me with comment sections, like, so many people are engaged in comment sections of any kind of on social media, but does it feel real time, or do you have to continuously community build by just going back into the comment section? Like, is it as engaging as it seems to ghosts like me who just go reading the comment section?
I think it's engaging because I'm doom scrolling on these pages, so I would be
Yeah.
deluding myself if I didn't say that they were engaging to me. But I know what you're saying because it's not like an immediate conversation. You're not
Mm-mm.
wrong that it's not gonna be as engaging as a conversation like we're having right now between you and me.
Real
Um,
time, right.
yeah, real time, but that doesn't change the fact that the insights and the points that are being brought up, even if they were written 10 years ago, could still be just as correct as they are
Mm.
today, right? You're talking about a book. These books exist forever.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just curious about the purpose or the indulgence. Like, they seem to be huge, these subreddits and comment sections. And kind of as an observer, I'm thinking, what draws you in? And is it before or after the reading?
What draws me in more than anything is the specificity of topics because
Okay.
it's more of a question of volume and options that you have available to you. Sure, you can go to a book club, but they'll only choose one book to read if you're doing it in person. But if you go
Yeah.
online and you can basically find a book club back and forth for practically any popular book ever, right? Do you see
Hmm.
the value in this? And then you can ask for extremely specific recommendations to actual people instead of AI, like we talked about last time.
Yeah.
There's a subreddit called Recommend Me a Book. You can just say, I loved this and that book, but I'm not a fan of YA. Recommend me a book. And then actual people will give you titles and maybe a little description of the book and why
Wow.
you might like it.
So people are seeking out people who are looking for recommendations as well. Like, you're kind of so engaged in this way of communicating that you're waiting to recommend things to people who are looking. Like, not formally, but it's a thing. Like, I could go
I
out there
see
and
what
say,
you're
"I'm
saying.
looking for this."
I see what you're saying. Like there's definitely value in having people ready to recommend you books based on your
Yeah,
requests, but like what's in it for people recommending the books, right?
exactly. Like, why are they there?
I
That's
don't
the
know, librarian wannabes or actual librarians that have
okay.
nothing to do at work. I mean,
I
lots
did
of people
not mean
love
to
books.
phrase it like that.
A lot of people love books, and just engaging in bringing other people into the hobby is very intriguing to
Yeah.
them. It's kind of like when you love something, you want
Hmm.
other people to do it, and this is why I want you to read fantasy.
Okay, all right, thank you. And it's cool that when you say it like that, when you say it as a hobby, it makes a lot of sense because I wouldn't be, um, I'd be very much understanding of people who are in a subreddit about woodworking or something, right? Looking for tips,
Yeah.
offering tips and tricks and tools, and reaching out to community and recommending this subreddit, like for people who are just starting out in the hobby. It makes total sense. With books, though, it kind of feels strange or odd, but it is similar. It's not dissimilar to like the TikTok, page, book talk, or anything else like that.
So I don't think it's explicit, but there is a culture on these pages, these like recommendation pages and advice pages on Reddit that if you're going to seek out advice, it's also very helpful if you give it out as well. If you have that
Hmm.
knowledge, right? It's a give and take. Nobody's policing it, but I know that I've taken recommendations from Reddit and I've also posted on that subreddit as well.
Wow. Okay, you're not just ghosting like
Mhm.
I do. Okay, now I have a kind of a follow-up on the other end of the spectrum then. Are people
Mhm.
still going to libraries? I feel like we have to bring this question up, at least every 3rd episode or something, because we talk about all these newer, ways that people are engaging with books, and of course, you're online with your book clubs, and you're online in the subreddits, and you're online in whatever other ways using AI to get your recommendations, but the old school way of doing any of this, if the book van or whatever they called it, book bus? I don't know, wasn't coming to you, book truck maybe? Anyways, you would go to the library and talk to a real person and they would recommend books to you because they were well read and that's why they're in this profession or, volunteering as a librarian, whatever it is. So Anyways, do you ever think about that now? Going to a
Library
library?
is I have no reason to go to a library.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is,
Libraries
libraries
are
do
online as well, I
so
guess.
much more. Yes, they do so much
Yeah.
more than just lending out books, right? They have
Yeah.
computers and recording studios, and they rent out technology like TVs and iPads and iPhones for functions, and 3D printing and printing services, even like communal spaces to share, right? It feels like they need a new name other than library, because that's a secondary function to them. It's just a
Oof.
community room that just happens to have books in it.
But do you not feel like we need to get back in touch? We've just, over the last several minutes, talked about all these other ways, and then in part 1 of the conversation, all these other ways that we're getting recommendations, which is fabulous, by the way, it's all out there. But is the essence of all this the library as we knew it?
That's a loaded question. I feel like you have an opinion on
It's
this.
very philosophical. I'm just saying yes, of course it is. You know, we go I agree with you that I don't have a lot of use for libraries anymore, and I think of it more as the accessibility, obviously. Like, I'm not gonna go pick up
Mhm.
a physical book, so why am I walking into a physical library? But in terms of recommendations, in terms of trusted reviews, in terms of, who are we actually listening to when it comes to books? I feel like libraries have a huge place in that still, especially if we're going online and asking AI, then shouldn't we go and talk to a librarian?
Again, I think you need to consider the volume that's available to you online. You have
Of
more
course.
books, more places to get recommendations, more tailored recommendations. You get more ways to read. You don't have to wait for a book to be available. You get more places to get reviews, just more of everything. It literally I I don't wanna be too like, I'm not criticizing libraries or anything like that, but they just can't compete with what the internet offers nowadays. When you combine
Mm.
all the literacy, reading, audiobook resources that are on the web, your local library cannot compete with that. But I think what you're advocating here is just the community aspect. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
community aspect, it's the real person aspect, and also that everything as we know it now still has some level of library in it, whether it's the searching or the commenting or the whatever. Like, I
Mm.
totally agree with you that everything is online now. So there's really no need for us to either walk into a physical library or talk to a librarian, like a real human being in real time. But I think that there's something special in it, or something core in it that we're not necessarily seeing as much today. How about if you were okay, like the same way you go on Reddit and look for a recommendation, how about if you were to call a library hotline and talk to a real person on the
No,
other end?
absolutely
No? You're
not.
not even
I don't
picking up
know
the
who this person
phone.
is.
Guy
I
just wants to type. He just wants to use a keyboard.
Probably because my screen reader talks a lot faster than people.
Oh,
Again,
wow.
it's a question of volume. I just want more.
Ooh,
No, but the
it's a
thing is, if I'm calling
generational
like a
gap in this
library
conversation.
hotline, clearly, but you're only like 4 years older than me.
I
You're not
know,
my
but
senior.
still. I'm
If
representing
I'm
those older than
calling
me.
if I'm calling a library hotline and ask them, "Oh, I want a book recommendation. I really like,
What's wrong with
fantasy and
that?
intrigue
Are you
and stuff."
kidding me?
How do I know that these people have books to recommend in that field? That might not be the type of thing they read. They might not read fantasy. If I go and post that on a subreddit, on Reddit, if that same person at the other end of the hotline saw my post, he'd be like, "Well, I have nothing to add. I don't read fantasy."
I
And somebody
don't
who
know.
does read fantasy will
It's
comment on it.
It's quality though.
Yeah.
Librarians are well read. It's like part of the job description. It's part of the reason why you would end up there, you know? It's like everybody and anybody can read like 3 books and then go on Reddit and be like, "Oh my gosh, you would love this." And you'd have to just take their word for it, or, happenstance, you end up on that comment or that recommendation, so you're gonna go pick it up and then you're like, "Ugh." But librarians? No. And they'll just pass by the way, they'll just pass the phone to somebody who can help you. Okay, they're not just gonna pretend that they read whatever
One
you
of their
wanted them
other
to
2
read.
coworkers. Yeah, I
Yeah,
really like that. So
exactly. Come on.
Okay, so we're talking about recommendations here, but
Yes.
after the fact, you can engage with reviews. And this is a
Mhm.
big part of my personal enjoyment of audiobook listening as a hobby, and that's getting other people's interpretations of the books that I've already read and comparing them to my experience of those books. And I want to ask you how you engage with reviews, if at all, and if you find them valuable, be that before reading or after reading.
Okay, this is a very simple answer for me. I am so impressionable. I do not want to listen to or read people's reviews like 90% of the time. And in fact,
Mhm.
sometimes I've accidentally scrolled too far, and that's why I've read reviews before starting to read a book. I don't like it. I find uh I find that it's too subjective. People don't focus on the things that I wanna focus on. I just wanna know if it's ratings, I'll take. Like, if something is rated really well or if it's making the charts or if it's critically acclaimed, then I'll take it, but I'm not necessarily interested in hearing what everyday people have to say about a book in the comment section or in the review section of Audible or Kindle or Goodreads or whatever else we're using. Do you have any specific, like, separation of thought between ratings and reviews?
I'm kind of the opposite of you. I think
Okay.
ratings are pretty useless and that reviews are the way to go. Now, you say that you're very impressionable and that reviews can taint your impression of a book before you read it. So, for example, if you
Yeah.
read a review of a book saying, "Yeah, it's kinda mid and slow, but, like, it's
Then
kind
I
of
go
worth
in
it in
thinking
the
that.
end," then you go in thinking, "Oh my god, this first I just need to grind through
Yeah.
this first half."
Or
I get
I'm not gonna
that.
read this for 75% being slow, forget it. Yeah.
I totally get that. The thing is, it's not that detrimental to have an impression put upon you. Because even if you thought the first half of that book was slow going into it, you might be
Mm,
pleasantly surprised, right? Like, I think you should be more mindful of your own impressions of a book and then consider other people's impressions as secondary. No, I know
yeah.
that might be easier said than done, but you
I
gain
think
a
it's just because
lot.
it's noisy. Go, go. Yeah, you gain a lot.
You gain a lot from learning of what people thought of a book before reading it. Like, for example, like someone might say, "Oh, there's some very interesting subtle themes about feminism and the role of women." And now you're going to go into
Mhm.
that book kind of looking deeper into those themes, right? Which
Yes.
is an aspect of that book that you might otherwise not have picked up on if you hadn't read a review of that book before starting it, right? Do you see the value in that?
I
It's
do. I totally
the
do, but I'd
problem
rather
is
hear it
when
from New
you
York
read
Times.
some of this. Okay, that's fair. And that kind of brings me to where you're getting your reviews because some dude on Reddit or
Yep.
Goodreads might not be the best place to get a review. When you go into these places where anybody can write a review, you want to make sure that you're reading a handful of them so you get at least like a portrait, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just one random person. Now, people get paid to write book reviews on the New York Times and other publications like it.
Yes. Mhm.
And then the question is like, what makes these people qualified to be the arbiters of taste when it comes to books and audiobooks?
I don't know what makes them qualified per se, but I trust them more because I feel like it's more of a thoughtful understanding of a book. You know, you let it sit, you let it digest, you prep, you have impressions that you want to cleanly and concisely and maybe wittily put in an article. And I think that that's better than some of these kind of real time reactionary comments that you find. And not only that, let's say I'm looking at reviews of a book on Audible, right? People can be specifically talking about the audiobook, which I don't know if they're an avid audiobook listener or not. I don't know if they enjoy audiobooks, if they enjoyed the narration, like all of these kind of nuanced subject matters that you and I will talk about because we're always listening to audiobooks. I have no idea what the scope of this person's review comes from versus like reading reviews of that same book on Kindle or Goodreads or whatever, Google Books, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like,
Mm.
there's just not enough depth or clout or not enough trust for me that there's going to be enough depth. I agree with you though that you want to go in with an idea or a portrait, but sometimes that portrait to me is this a 4 out of 5 or a 2 out of 5? And that's why the average rating kind of sits better with me
Is that how you
paired with
think of
a
books? You're like halfway through a book, somebody asks you, "Hey, Ramya, how you liking the book?" It's like 2.5 out of
It's
5.
like 2 by 5, yeah, but wait till the end. No, but you know what I mean? Like, if I'm gonna average out the everyday person's comment, reviews, and impressions of a book, I'd rather do it in a rating system and then go read, like, a legit review from someone, like you said, who either got paid to write it or just someone who's genuinely reviewing books because that's what they do. Like, you can trust them in that way.
It's Friday night. You fire up Uber Eats. You want some sushi. You're not gonna go for the place that has 3.5 stars and
No.
300 reviews. You want the place that has 4.9 stars and 1,000 reviews, right?
But
So
hold
the
up. Are you
number of
looking
reviews matters.
Yes, but wait, are you looking at the reviews right off Uber Eats? Because those people are gonna be mad about how the food was delivered and whether it was hot or not. Or are you also gonna look at Google reviews with people who have sat in on the restaurant? You know what I mean? It all matters.
Yes, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the scope of a review, where if
Mhm.
somebody on Audible, you go in the comment section, they're talking about, "Oh, I didn't like the accent." Like, you're not saying
I
you didn't like
swear,
the
I've
book,
read
you're
that.
saying, "I just
I've
don't like audiobooks." It's like, what? You're just reviewing the medium, not the book itself. What's the point of
Right.
this? So
Yeah.
so this is why it does matter where you get your reviews, because you want people who are actually like engaged in the medium and care about the book in terms of
Mhm.
the content, the themes, the characters, the story, what you'd learn from it. That's why I find Audible is like an especially bad place to find reviews. But for example, like
Oh,
on a
yeah,
place like
totally.
on Goodreads, which one of the big functions of Goodreads is user reviews. That's typically people who are pretty book smart. Like they generally are very well read because you wouldn't read
You're gonna
one
say
book a
that?
year and
You're
you're
gonna
not
make
going to
that
be well
general
read
statement?
and be on a literacy
What
social
are you
media network.
talking
Who
about?
does that? You
Goodreads is basically
you're so
social
much
media
more
for books.
cynical with me.
No. Everyone's on Goodreads. Everyone and their
No,
sister is on Goodreads. Yeah. You can download the app, make an account, and done. Now you're a well-read Goodreads user.
I guess, but do people write
Be
reviews
cautious.
constantly? Right?
Be
Do Okay. No, you know what? You're right. You're right. There's a lot of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. And
What?
to, to illustrate that point is sometimes you read a review for a book on Goodreads, and
Yeah,
if you've already read that book, sometimes you find people's interpretations of a book that are just objectively wrong. They're like,
sure.
this part of the book didn't make any sense to me, but it was like perfectly well explained in the book.
Yeah.
And then it makes you
You're
wonder
like, you just don't know
ev
what you're
it
talking
makes you
about.
question everything else they just said in their review, right? And this is why you need the sushi place that has 1,000 reviews. You need
Of
the
course.
Goodreads books, the books on Goodreads that have thousands of reviews, not just 5 or 6.
And kind of going back to what you started
Mm.
this conversation with, around the high school mandatory reads and such. The books that when we're younger are necessary in school curriculums for us to read, for us to pick up, for us to like explore and then talk about the character development, the plot lines, how it sat with us, what kind of literary devices are being used in the book. All these things are really what prep us for being good readers, right? I mean, you can argue the
Yeah.
details of that kind of thing, the details of how your English class went, etc. But really, like, imagine if uh when you're younger, you aren't necessarily given the scope of what reading a book properly feels like. Was it last year or earlier this year when you talked about that book that's supposed to help you read better? Can't remember the name of the
Oh,
book.
yeah. That book was, How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler. The thing is it came out in, I think, early '70s or late '60s or something like that, so it is kind of
Mhm.
dated in a way, and
It
it
was kinda
specifically
outdated.
has to do with nonfiction and this idea of
Yeah,
how you get information out of a book. It does have
yeah.
a brief section on fiction, and, a part in a part that I thought was really interesting was understanding what the author is trying to do, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And beforehand, you should know if this is, are you reading a comedy book? Is this drama? Is this a book that's supposed to talk about themes of the human condition and what it means to live and be alive and very heady topics like that?
Yeah.
Um, this is some, I feel like I bang on about this so much. It's so important to know what you're about to read thematically, to come to terms with the author, to see what they were writing, trying to do, so that you don't lie to yourself thinking a book is thing A while it's actually trying to be thing B.
Yes.
You're gonna be mad that the book is thing B because it's not thing A.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I think, like, when I say I'm impressionable, it's because there's so much noise out there, and I don't mean to completely go on about this being very negative, "Oh, there's too many recommendations and too many reviews and too much comments," but really though, there is so much out there, and you can go into a book in the opposite way, Jacob, where you're like, I think I'm supposed to know exactly what this book is about. Let's see though. And then you're not necessarily going in with the openness, or with the critical eye, or with the training of what it means to read a book properly or prep yourself to get into a book.
Right.
It's
It's
very
it's
interesting.
difficult to critique music if you don't know about the music industry or
Yep.
like a little bit of music theory, right? It's difficult to critique
Yeah.
a movie if you don't know about, cinematography and general plot structure and that type of thing. Like you need to know the
Mhm.
bare bones at the very least. So there
Yeah.
is some value in English classes like that. But
Ah,
all the
good.
things we just mentioned today, like book clubs and where to find recommendations and reviews and what to take seriously and what to not take seriously, it's just a supplement to your audiobook listening experience that I personally think is very valuable. I'm still a little unclear on how you feel about all of it. I think you're very much into this whole world of just jumping into a book
Yes.
blind. Sorry for the pun, but
Yeah, John
okay.
Crowley,
We'll
Big Little.
we'll talk
That the quote was from that book I just jumped into.
we'll talk about this more, okay? And I think we need to get some
Mhm.
guests' opinions on this, maybe be a tiebreaker. But
Please. Yeah,
yeah, this
we
will be
do.
interesting. Rams, thank you so much. We'll talk again this Friday.
Thanks, Jacob.
That was Ramya Amuthan. She's occasionally on Kelly and Company, but she's also my co-host on this show and the producer of AMI Audiobook Review. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review on AMI Today. You can find a repeat of AMI Today on AMI Audio every 6 hours. It airs at 1 p.m. Eastern. The show is also available on your favorite podcast platforms, including YouTube. Thanks for joining us today. I was your host, Jacob Shymanski. Have a good one.